Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Red Bank Humanist Hot Critical Forum. My name is Lee Beaumont. I'm the Vice President of Red Bank Humanists. Eric is out of town. Thank you all for coming out with us today. One of the primary goals of the Red Bank Humanists is to bring people together to meet, form relationships, and talk with other humanists. I hope you enjoyed today's program and continue to join us. The Red Bank Humanists is a nonprofit organization which promotes the ideals and principles of the philosophy of secular humanism. Secular humanists do not rely upon gods or other supernatural forces to solve their problems or provide guidance for their conduct. We turn our attention to the living and away from hearsay about the wisdom of the long day. We rely upon the application of reason, the lessons of history, and personal experience to form an ethical foundation and to create meaning in life. The Red Bank Humanists promote these ideals by producing educational programs like today's forum. You can keep track of upcoming events by visiting the Red Bank Humanist website, looking out for e-news in your email, following us on Facebook, or checking on Meetup. We hope you'll choose to join our community and become a member of RBH. It's only $30 a year for an individual or $45 for a family. Your support is what makes it possible for us to produce events and programs like this. Today's speaker is Ron Flannery. Ron is a longtime RBH member. He's an RBH board member. He's a retired computer scientist in the future. He'll be speaking on the nature of religious experience. Please give a warm welcome to Ron.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I know you've seen enough of me, but here it is again, right? What I'm going to talk about today is like that. Today, what I'm going to talk about is the nature of religious experience, and this religious experience is not, going out on the street wearing a cross and having somebody talk to you about the cross, right? That's not a religious experience. A religious experience is something that's totally out of the ordinary, a transcendent experience, an experience that gives you visions and lets you commune with God and things like that. So the first question is, are these things real? Are religious experiences an actual thing? And if they are, where do they come from? Do they come from gods and spirits and mystic events in the universe and so on, or do they come from someplace else? Next question is, are they a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because if a religious experience is a good thing, that's something you might want to pursue. But if it's a bad thing, it's something you might want to avoid. So understanding a religious experience and the nature of it is going to help you make that kind of decision. And if you decide to pursue them, what's the best way to do it? So that's what I'm going to look at. So first, are they real? Well, they're as old as humanity itself. Now, how old is humanity? Written records of humanity go back no further than 10,000 years, right? But as long as there are written records coming from human beings, from Homo sapiens, there are references to religious experiences. And if they go back that far, either they're being totally misunderstood or they're an actual real thing. But unfortunately, in the early days of humans, people would have a religious experience, and the only way they could explain it is through some kind of mysticism, because that's all they had. They couldn't talk about brain science, they couldn't talk about DNA, they couldn't talk about physics or chemistry or anything like that. Christian philosopher Rudolf Ott in 1917 coined the term numinous and says that these experiences, which he calls numinous, are basic religious experience, and says that's what gave rise to religion in the first place. So why do we have religion? Because people have religious experiences, and this word numinous is just a self-defining word that he made up. Well, these numinous experiences often involve a sense of ecstasy. Okay, now one of the big problems with religious experience is all the language that's associated with it is language that's kind of amorphous, and it's hard to nail down. None of it came from science. It came from guys sitting around saying, wow, did you feel that? How would you describe that? Oh, it's numinous. okay? And we have no idea what that means. Ecstasy is a word like that. It comes from a Greek phrase, ekstasis, which means out of stillness or outside yourself. And this is the sensation of being removed from ordinary life. So there you go. If you have a sensation that takes you out of the ordinary, that's ecstasy. So we got a definition. Here's a statue by Bernini showing the ecstasy of St. Teresa. There's a close-up, and if you look at her face, she could be having an orgasm, but apparently it's a state of ecstasy brought on because of some religious experience she's having. Here are a couple of other examples. I keep forgetting this guy's name. Anyway, he's got the stomata, and he's receiving divine inspiration. And this is a common theme in Renaissance art. In numinous or sacred experience, the believer comes in contact with transcendental reality. And there it is again. We're out of the norm, right? Above the norm. Norman Habel, he's an Australian Old Testament scholar. And I think he was, he's a Protestant, I forget which denomination. Anyway, he defines numinous experience as the structured way in which a believer enters into a relationship with or gains an awareness of the sacred within the context of a particular religious tradition. And you got to love stuff like this. First off, it takes a believer. Okay, he says if you want to have a religious experience, you got to be a believer. But the earliest people who had religious experiences weren't believers, they just had experiences. He also says it's got to be a structured way. There's got to be some kind of a ritual that takes you there. And that ritual has to come from the context of a particular religious tradition. So he's very exclusive here. You want to have a religious experience? Well, you better be a Lutheran. You better be a believer, right? And you've got to follow the structure that our religion gives you to take you to that experience. Moore and Habel identify two classes of religious experience. And again, the reason I'm taking you through this is first, we've got to define what a religious experience is. But the other thing is I want to demonstrate just how loosey-goosey all this talk about religious experience can be. So they have two classes of religious experiences, the immediate, I'll talk about that, and then the mediated. So obviously they're the opposite of each other. The immediate comes from the believer, comes to the believer without any intervening agency or mediator. And the deity or divine is experienced directly. So here I am walking through the woods and I have a religious experience. There's nobody there to make it happen. But don't forget, this is also the guy that says, well, I better belong to a church, I better be a believer, and I better be following some process. So I'm not sure how this immediate experience is going to come along without somebody helping me. And that would be the mediated religious experience. And then they break it down into four classical forms of immediate religious experience. Numinous, and we talked about that a bit. Ecstasy, we talked about that a bit. Enthusiasm and mystic experience. So it's multi-layered. There's the magnificent mystery. And in this form, the Christian uses prayer and contemplation on the Bible to feel at awe with God. So there's the process, thus creating a numinous experience. So if you pray and you contemplate on the Bible, you can have this numinous religious experience. And prayer in this context is a conversation between you and God. So this whole business of believing the religion and believing in the God is very important. Ecstasy is the soul leaving the body. And this brings up the whole dichotomy thing, right? Your soul, your consciousness is separate from your body. They're two different things. And the soul then can leave the body. And if it does, it can go to this higher plane of existence. And this is actually something that people practice. These are Turkish Sufi doing a dance that goes on for hours. They listen to very specific music while they do it. They whirl around and they do this in a circle. And they do it for hours and they reach a state of ecstasy by doing this. So real or imagined, We'll talk about that in a minute. Then there's enthusiasm. And again, this goes to the dichotomy question. So if your soul can leave your body, then another soul can come in and take up residence in your body. Being a Christian, says Peter Kreeft, is more like having your soul possessed by a spirit than having your mind clothed with new beliefs. It's like being haunted by the Holy Ghost. Well, if you can be entered by the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, and that can take you to this enthusiasm level of religious experience, you can also be possessed by bad spirits, and then you're possessed, right? And if you think back to early times, go back before the medieval even, if somebody exhibited a behavior that was outside the norm and even spoke about it as though it was outside the norm, and they saw things you didn't see and they heard things you didn't hear, a lot of people would point at that and say, oh, you're possessed by a demon, right? And depending on how you behave, this could be a very bad thing for you. And finally, there's the mystic experience, becoming one with the transcendent. And this is where you actually become the spirit you believe in. And mostly this comes from Eastern religions. And I'll talk about them a bit too. Going on, psychologist and philosopher William James described 4 characteristics of mystical experience in a book he wrote, The Varieties of Religious Experience. He talks about they have to be transient. So you have this experience, it's temporary, and then you come back to earth. All right, so you have your religious experience, you go away, you come back to earth, and you become normal again. And you have that normal frame of reference. But while you're there, you're outside the normal perception of space and time. So there's that. They're ineffable. You have your experience, you come back and you say, whoa, I had a religious experience. Somebody says, well, tell me about it. You say, I wish I could. But you can't, because if you could put it into words, it wouldn't be a religious experience anymore. And they're noetic. So again, you're asked, well, what was it like? Tell me about it. Well, now I know things that I never knew before. I had an epiphany. And again, they say, well, what was the epiphany? I wish I could tell you. Right? But it's really hard. It's ineffable. And they're passive. Now, according to James, the experience happens to the individual without conscious control. So this kind of denies the whole Hegel thing, where he said, hey, you've got to have a procedure that you follow and yada, yada, yada. And James says, no, it can just come on you. So if we chart all this out, what we get is a whole bunch of terminology. Religious experiences are ubiquitous historically. They're numinous. They include ecstasy and enthusiasm and mystic experiences. You experience transcendental reality. Sometimes they're immediate, sometimes they're mediated. They're always explained historically with religion. They're transient, they're ineffable, they're noetic, they're passive. It's a word salad of things that have very vague meanings. So where do these experiences come from? Well, here's Jake Blues having his religious experience. He's being given a mission from God, if you've ever seen the movie. And the mission is to go out and make a whole bunch of money and save the penguins. So one place you can get religious experiences is from religious practices. And the first one is extended exercise. And this is a practice that goes way back. And it includes things like running in a large communal circle. And this is generally tribal and neo-pagan practice. And I compare this to a modern thing that we recognize, which is called a runner's high, where exercise increases the levels of endocannabinoids in the bloodstream. And endocannabinoids, and you know what CBD is, right? That's a cannabinoid. Endocannabinoids are CBD with attached molecules that have other effects. And one of the things about endocannabinoids is they can actually go through the blood-brain barrier, and they can directly affect your brain. So if you're a long-distance runner, you hit the wall, you break through the wall, your blood gets flooded with endocannabinoids, they go to the brain, and then you get a mood-improving neuromodulator that affects things like anxiety levels and feelings of calm. So you lose your anxiety, you become calm, and now you can just keep on running. It used to be thought that this was endorphins. It turns out endorphins can't go through the blood-brain barrier. So endocannabinoids. So let's put up a chart now. Extended exercise, that's a way to get to religious experience. And if you increase extended exercise, you increase endocannabinoids, you lower anxiety, and you increase feelings of calm. And those pluses and minuses are just, is it going up or is it going down? Other things you can do historically is praying, music, and dance. So we can add those to our chart. But in all the documentation I read, they didn't go very deep. It was just, here's a way to get to a religious experience without much definition around it. Now, I was raised Catholic. So when I was young, one of the things that I was told to do, I went to Catholic schools all the way until high school. And I even went to Christian Brothers Academy. So I was really well indoctrinated. But one of the things I had to do was say the rosary on a daily basis. And as a kid, I did it. But look at what you have to do and think in terms of self-hypnosis and deep meditation. It starts out with, you do the sign of the cross and you say the Apostles' Creed. Then you go to, Then you go to the first bead and you say a different prayer. Then you go to a collection of 3 beads and you say the same prayer 3 times over. Then you get to this bead and you do the Glory Be. Then you get to this beat, you say the appropriate prayer, and you say it again, and you say it again, and you say it again, until you get to this beat, and you say the Glory Be. Then you get to this beat, and you say that other prayer, and you go through it over and over and over and over again. And you do this 5 full times. They're called the 5 decades. You get back to the Glory Be. You go down to the 3 beads. You say that appropriate prayer. You say the prayer for this bead, and then you get back here. You say the Apostles' Creed, and you do the sign of the cross. How long does this take? I mean, anybody here ever do that besides me? Yeah, how long does it take? Do you remember? It's like 45 minutes to an hour. Now, if you're doing this right, you're saying a prayer that has in it a certain rhythm, because, they tried to make it like poetry in a way. It's got a certain rhythm and it's got a certain breathing pattern associated with it. And you're saying the words. So your mind can't wander. You have to focus on the words, because if your mind wanders, the words stop. So you have to ignore whatever your brain is doing and focus on the prayer. And you keep doing the prayers. And then you get to a new prayer. So drives your focus back on. And you go around this whole thing and you're doing the breathing, you're doing the chanting, you're doing the focus, and then you get to the end. This is deep meditation practice, right? This is just like any other meditation practice, but this one has a specific duration and a specific pattern. So yeah, that can certainly take you to a different plane, because like meditation does, which has been proven to be a very effective method of getting to a semi-religious experience. Music can do it too. Now, the most obvious thing is trained response. If you go to church, especially of a church that focuses on music, like if you're a Lutheran, you're immersed in Bach, right, through your young years, and usually played on an organ. So when you hear these songs, Bach played on an organ, and you relate it back to, well, where did I first hear this? I was in a community where I was part of the group. Everybody accepted me. Everybody was there to support me. And you got all these great communal feelings that are associated now with this music. And no matter where you are for the rest of your life, if you hear that music, it takes you there, right? And that's a low-level religious experience. The other thing, though, is there are direct neurological effects of music on your brain, because think about it. The oldest musical instrument goes back 40,000 years before the present. It's a bone flute. Now, flute music, no matter how simple it is very sophisticated music. And, before that, it was probably drums, right? Just beating a stick against another stick or something like that. And that, we don't know how far back that goes, but it could go back as far as 300,000 years. And now Homo sapiens has only been around for about 200,000 years. So we're talking about hominids that predate even what we consider ourselves Homo sapiens. And if that's the case, if that's true, but even if it only goes back 40,000 years, if that's all true, then it's deeply embedded in the way our brains respond to music. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it at all. And then there's dance. We saw the Sufis doing their whirling dervish dance, but it also happens in almost every primitive society in the world. They have their dance, they have the music that goes with the dance, and they have chanting, prayers that go with the dance. So it's a trifecta. So this is probably the most effective way to get yourself to a religious experience. Another religious practice, which I do not recommend, is extreme pain, mortification of the flesh. When I was in Catholic school, and I would have some mission to undertake for the nuns. They'd say, go around and distribute these flyers to every classroom in the building. So I'd do that. And I'd get to the last one and I'd put it on her desk and I'd go, and she'd say, oh, was that hard? Mortify yourself. And what she meant by that was man up. But the religious meaning to that is take that pain and dedicate it to God. Okay. Now, during medieval periods, when a whole town would experience a plague and a third of the population of the town would die a horrible death, everybody would look around and say, well, I don't know anything about science. I don't know what germ theory is. So this must be God saying, I failed him in some way. I sinned against God, and he's punishing me. And the best thing I can do is participate in the punishment. And by participating in the punishment and flagellating myself, I can speed up the recovery from this condemnation. And I will endure this pain in the name of doing that, participating with God. There are various things they would do. They would flagellate themselves. They'd wear hair shirts that itched horribly and gave them blisters on their backs and so on. Or they would wear a chain around their leg with spikes in it called a surplice. And every time you take a step, but only the rich could afford to pain themselves this way. But every time they take a step, those little teeth on the surface would bite into their leg. But it was apparently effective. So we can add that to our list of ways to get to a religious experience, but it takes a specific context. You have to say, I'm enduring this pain for the sake of overcoming my own dirtiness and helping become clean and participating with God in doing it. Other religious practices include meditation, and they're used to calm the mind. And we already saw praying the rosary is one way to do that. And there are a lot of cultures that do that, by the way. The Greeks have a history of having a string of beads that they go through when they're not doing anything else. And that's their way of meditating by focusing on going through those beads. But you attain a state of consciousness such as nirvikalpa samadhi if you do it right. And meditation can be done in many ways. You can do it with breathing. You can do it through concepts. You can do it through mantras. You can do it by staring at mandalas and tracing the patterns. You can go use symbols. This is my favorite. This is a meditative walk. You build a maze, and in the center of the maze, you put a bench or place to sit. And when you enter the maze, you're meditating on the walk and following the maze. And as you go deeper and deeper into the maze, and it takes a while because it's a large, convoluted thing, eventually, you're leaving the world. And you get to the bench, you sit on the bench, and now you do your meditation. You've left the world. So now you're in a transcendental place. The meditation goes really well. You say, that felt good. You get up, and now you follow the maze back into the world. This is another effective way of doing it. So, meditation. And meditation, the end goals of meditation, there are a couple. One is a transcendental experience, and the other one is to, what's the word? The other one is to give up all your illusions, right? The word will come to me. Now, this whole business of meditation is very old, but it's mainly coming from the East. So somebody had to kind of break that on the world of the West. And this is Douglas Harding. And he wrote a book about this. And let me go to this. He wrote a book called Having No Head, Zen and the Rediscovery of the Obvious. And he published this in 1961, and that's when it broke, unlike the United States. So if you were in college back in those days, that's when you first heard about meditation, Zen Buddhism, and the like, because before that it was pretty obscure. And Zen Buddhism is a slightly different take. It's not really a religion. It's more of a philosophy, and it's based on the fact that using words to narrate your life is actually masking reality. And we can talk about that in depth later if you want. But he started practicing Zen Buddhist meditation and reading Zen koans and thinking on the thoughts of Buddhist philosophers. And he says, reason and imagination and all mental chatter died down. I forgot my name, my humanness, my thingness, all that could be called me or mine. See, he's transcending. The past and the future dropped away. He was lighter than air, clearer than glass, and altogether released from himself. I was nowhere around. Interesting state to get to, but sounds like fun. Here's a Zen koan. Well, and I missed the other one. What was your face before your mother and father were born? Okay, think on that for a while. Here's another one. Who can say what this is without calling it a jug of milk? And this is a very famous Zen koan. If you want, I'll tell you the whole story later. But we can now add that. Oh yeah, enlightenment, that's the word I was looking for. So Zen Buddhism is to get you to a transcendental experience through meditation, and enlightenment through eliminating the cloud of the fog of words that you use to narrate your life. And then there's entheogens, which is a famous, it's a fabulous word. And the reason I'm using it is because it's short enough to fit on my chart, but it really means psychoactive substances. And there's lots of those. There's ayahuasca, you've heard about that one, peyote, psilocybin, some things I never heard of, cannabis, LSD, MDMA, soma, ketamine. And these things all deliver religious experiences. And experiments have been done to prove this. Dr. R.R. Griffiths and colleagues at Johns Hopkins University did a double-blind study evaluating the psychological effects of psilocybin, comparing with Ritalin. And they got 36 hallucinogen naive adults. I love that phrase. I used to be one. But 36 people were recruited who had never done any drugs, and 61% of them had mystical experiences. And then he went back to them after 2 months and said, you remember that mystical experience? Was that a real thing? And they said, yeah, it was. Then he went back after 14 months and said, was that still a mystical experience you can relate to? And said, yep, it sure was. So it definitely had a long-lasting effect. So now we can add that to our list. And look at all the ways you can have a religious experience. Am I done? In 2011, a paper suggested that psychiatric conditions associated with psychotic spectrum symptoms may be possible explanations for revelatory-driven experience and activities such as those of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and St. Paul. And I had a few slides that went into this, but it gets a little too clinical. But basically, what the paper suggested is that certain types of epilepsy, certain types of epileptic experiences make you see flashes of light, make you hear voices, make you see things, and then you come back to reality. And when you describe this to people, they say, oh, you had a religious experience. If it was 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, because people didn't understand until very recently how these things actually affected your brain and how your brain actually works. So now we add that to the list, psychiatric conditions. Well, what do all these things have in common? If they all have something in common, we can narrow it down to some kind of scientific explanation for how religious experiences come about. So we know they're real, and we know there's a whole list of ways of inducing them. So how do they work? Well, if you're a neuroscientist, then you study something called neurophysiology, which is how does the brain affect the self? right? If a change in the brain happens, does it affect a change in how you behave, how you think, how you feel, what you experience? And it turns out it does. The neuroscience of religion says that neural correlates are the basis of all cognitive functions, right? Everything you experience through your brain. And it takes time for that to happen, right? What you think you are experiencing right now is right now, but it's not. What you're experiencing right now is your brain predicting what right now would look like after it's done all the processing and how long it takes to get here. You follow that? A simple example is somebody throws you a ball. Back there, somebody's going to throw me a ball. Well, my visual cortex is taking in the picture of the ball heading in my direction. And the visual cortex is back here, and my eyes are up here. So my eyes see the ball coming, and the eyes transmit that to the thalamus. And then the thalamus says, okay, this is visual input. So I'm going to take this visual input, and I'm going to send some of it over here, but it's going to tell me what it is. And I'm going to send some of it over here, and that tells me where it is. And I'm going to send some of it over here that does the predictive analysis of where this thing is moving to. And then it collects all that processing from those different places in the brain, sends that up to an organ up here in your brain that then sends it to the frontal lobe in your brain. And that's what you experience as now. But that took time. So if I'm doing all that, I can't see the ball in real time. I can only see where it was. But what I see is what my brain is projecting where the ball probably is. Okay? Complicated, I know, but that means that the reality you see is something that's being painted by the brain. It's not the real now. It's a projection by the brain. And they say that if that's the way the brain works, all your cognitive functions are based on that principle, and that means all your religious experiences must be as well. So these religious experiences must be emergent properties of neural correlates. So what's a neural correlate? Well, when I see something, my thalamus takes the eye input and says, okay, some of that goes back here, some of that goes over here, some of that goes over here, some of that goes over here. And each of those sections of the brain has a specific function to perform. Where is that? What is that thing that's coming up? Where is it going to be in a millisecond from now? Right? And those are all areas of the brain that are highly specific. Those are called neural correlates, what they produce. This approach does not necessitate, and these are not my words, this comes from Wikipedia. This approach does not necessitate exclusion of the self, but interprets the self, your consciousness of yourself, as influenced or otherwise acted upon by underlying neural mechanisms. So if those neural mechanisms are affected, then your reality is affected. Proponents argue that religious experience can be evoked then through stimulus of specific brain regions. Okay, so that's an interesting idea. What if I could put a magnet next to your head, a very powerful magnet, and activate some region of your brain? Would that change your experience? And conversely, if I put you in an MRI machine and I see what parts of your brain are very active, could I then predict what kind of experience you're having? So here's some SPECT images for somebody who's going to do some meditation. And the one on the left, that's the baseline. That's them not meditating. And the one on the right is them meditating. And you notice there are significant differences in the blood flow of the brain. So blood is being collected in specific areas when you're meditating where that blood is normally not so rich. And one of these areas is the temporal lobe. The other is the frontal cortex. And there's a third that I'll get to as well. But if you take a look at these, the temporal lobe, that's where the primary auditory cortex, the auditory association area, and the sensory speech area are. So some kinds of religious experience, like meditation, put more blood in those areas. So why would meditation light up that part of your brain that deals with speech and understanding speech and converting speech into meaning and things like that. The other part that gets activated is the prefrontal area. And this is where executive function takes place. And remember what I told you about the eyes and the sending the messages from the eyes to various different places, and then they get collected. The output of all of those areas of the brain get collected up here at the precuneus, and that gets sent to the frontal area. And the frontal area says, what just happened? Was that a good thing? If it was a good thing, how do I make it happen again? How do I make it happen better? And if it's a bad thing, how do I avoid this? Or how do I make it hurt less? Or what do I do about it? So both meditating Buddhists and praying Catholic nuns have been put into imaging machines, and they both have increased activity in the frontal lobes of the brain. So Buddhists meditating and Catholic nuns praying light up the frontal lobes of the brain. And these areas are linked with increased focus and attention, planning skills, the ability to project into the future, right? How can I avoid this happening again? And the ability to construct complex arguments. So let's make a chart out of this. Catholic praying sends blood to the frontal lobe. Increased blood flow gives you increased focus and attention. Zen Buddhist meditating, same deal. So this is interesting. If you want to increase your focus and attention, you got a choice now. You can say, well, I can become a nun and pray a lot, or I can become a Zen Buddhist and meditate and get the same effect. Intense Islamic prayer, which has as its most fundamental concept the surrendering of oneself to God, reduces the activity in the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes connected with it, as well as the activity in the parietal lobes. Now, the prefrontal cortex, we know what that does, but it makes sense in this context that a practice that centers on relinquishing control would result in decreased activity in this brain area. So now we can update our chart. If you're doing Islamic prayer and being a true Muslim, the blood flow to your frontal lobe decreases because you're relinquishing control, exactly the opposite effect of a Zen Buddhist meditating or a Catholic nun praying. So again, you can have a religious experience and you can either have one that relinquishes control or gives you increased focus. Pick your poison. They also mentioned in this the parietal lobe, okay? So what does the parietal lobe do? Go there. Both prayer and meditation correlate with a decreased activity in the parietal lobes. And the parietal lobes are responsible for where am I in space and where are my body parts, right? And there's a very famous test that a policeman may give you. They'll say, close your eyes and touch your nose. And if you can do that, then your proprioception is working. Okay, because you know where your nose is and you know where your finger is, even with your eyes closed, because your brain is tracking all that stuff in the parietal lobe. The other thing that's happening there is your sense of touch. So your sensitivity to temperature and your sensitivity to pain are being processed in the parietal lobe. Also, the dorsal stream of your visual and auditory system. And the dorsal stream is the stream that determines what is going on as opposed to where is it happening. So if you're a Catholic and you're praying, parietal lobe blood flow is being decreased, which means proprioception and sensitivity to pain and heat are being decreased. Okay. Now, what if you wanted to have an out-of-body experience? Losing proprioception, you lose contact with where is my body, where are my body parts, right? And that takes you to a newbie, an out-of-body experience. So you can get there with Catholic prayer. You can get there with Islamic prayer. Now you're giving up control, not only of who you are and how you think, but you're also giving up control of where am I? And meditation can take you to the same place in terms of parietal lobe. A recent study that Medical News Today reported on found that religion activates the same reward processing brain circuits as sex, drugs, and other addictive activities. Now, why do we have reward processing brain circuits? One reason, if you were here for my microbiome talk, you remember that a lot of serotonin, most of the serotonin, or half of the serotonin in your body comes from your gut bacteria. And more than half of your dopamine comes from your gut, from bacteria that live in your gut. And they do this to reward you and entice you to feed them the right things. That's true, right? So if you find something that's high in fat, and we're talking 30,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, if you find something that's high in fat, that's a rarity, but it's something your body needs and your gut microbiome needs. So when you eat that fat, they say, wow, fat, serotonin, dopamine, right? And they make you feel really good. Now you crave fat because you get rewarded for it. So you've got these circuits in your brain that light up for behaviors that your body needs you to perform. Now, the bad news is you can become addicted to anything that does that for you. So people get addicted to fat. They get addicted to salt, right? Why is bacon so good? But you can also become addicted to sex and drugs and other things. Researchers led by Dr. Jeff Anderson examined the brains of 19 young Mormons using a functional MRI scanner, and he asked whether and to what degree the participants were feeling the Spirit. And those who reported the most intense spiritual feelings displayed increased activity in those reward circuits. Oops. And these reward circuits all light up during sexual activities, when you're listening to music, when you're gambling, when you're taking drugs. And gambling is an interesting thing. We could talk about that later if you want to. But interesting, right? So the Mormons were having an effect when they were really into the spiritual thing that was equivalent to gambling or taking drugs or having sex. The participants also reported feelings of peace and physical warmth. So engaging in spiritual practices raises levels of serotonin, which is the happiness neurotransmitter, and endorphins. So spiritual practices give you a drug. So we can add this to a chart now. Spiritual feelings light up the reward processing areas of the brain, give you peace, physical warmth. So does sex, so does music, so does gambling, so does drugs. And all of these activities are addictive. So spiritual feelings are probably addictive as well. And this was recognized by Karl Marx. He says religion is the opium of the people. So now you got to ask, now that we've got all these ways of having religious experiences, are they a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there was a study published in March of 2011 that showed that greater atrophy in the hippocampus happens in individuals who identify with specific religious groups, as well as those with no religious affiliation. I read that and I said, uh-oh, is my hippocampus shrinking? Well, in this study, Owen and his friends used MRI to measure the volume of the hippocampus, which is a central structure of the limbic system that's involved in emotion as well in memory formation. If your hippocampus is shrinking, your ability to create memories is disappearing. Okay, that's what's going on. They evaluated the MRIs of 268 men and women who were 58 or over. The study focused specifically on religious individuals compared to non-religious individuals, and it also broke down the individuals into those who were born again, who have had life-changing religious experiences. And the results showed significantly greater hippocampal atrophy in individuals reporting a life-changing religious experience. They found significantly greater hippocampal atrophy among born-again Protestants, Catholics, and those with no religious affiliation, compared with Protestants not identifying as born again. So we can chart this as well. Religious individuals who are born again, higher atrophy. Not born again, not significant atrophy. No affiliation, higher atrophy. I'm really getting nervous now. But the authors offer the hypothesis, and this is difficult to prove, that the greater hippocampal atrophy in selected religious groups is related to stress. Why is that? Well, stress hormones are released when you're stressed. That makes sense. And they are known to depress the volume of the hippocampus over time. So they say being part of a religion and being born again puts you in a stressful situation, basically. This might also explain the fact that both non-religious as well as some religious individuals have smaller hippocampal volumes. So if you're born again and you're stressed, that's causing the atrophy. If you're not born again, you're less stressed because you don't have to live up to being born again, right? There's a lot of stress associated with that. Being in certain religions is very, very restrictive, especially if you go to the fundamentalist branch of a religion, right? Because then they're telling you how to dress, how to eat, when to eat, what to eat, where to eat, what day of the year to eat this thing, and so on. A lot of pressure, a lot of stress. No affiliation. If you're high in stress, you have no religious bulwark to help you relieve that stress. Okay, and maybe that's why. So now I'm not so worried because I have a community that helps me relieve that stress. In 2015, Duke University professor of psychiatry Harold Koenig and his research team carefully reviewed more than 3,000 studies published prior to that time. So they went through back through all of the literature, and a total of 79% of relevant studies showed a link between religion, spirituality, and psychological well-being, and it's a positive effect. So there's a positive physiological or psychological well-being effect from being religious or spiritual. A majority also demonstrated a relationship with physical well-being. So physiological benefits. Another finding is that religion and spirituality are related to longer life. So religion sounds like a good thing. In one study, researchers followed 8,450 people between the ages of 40 and 90 more for more than 8 years, noting those who passed away of any cause. I don't want to be a part of this group. You follow me around waiting for me to die, right? Thanks. The results revealed an 18% reduction in the risk of dying during this period for people who attended church services once a week. So if you want to live longer, go to church once a week.
Even if they drove there?
Well, I don't know how they got there. A 30% reduction for those attending more than once a week. Numbers approaching the power of regular, moderate physical exercise. So if you don't like going to the gym, go to the church. So now we chart that in there as well. So these are things that indicate that some religions are good for you and some are bad for you. So you don't want to be a born again if you're gonna look for longevity and the like, but you do want to go to church. So there must be something going on here as well, right? Because this religion and spirituality and church attendance seems to be really good for you. So how do you explain this? Well, one is better health habits. And I'll go back to my Catholic upbringing. I was told by the nuns, and this is true in a lot of religions, they teach you that and the way the nuns phrased it was, your body is a temple of the Holy Ghost. So I was told that from the time I was like 3. And if your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, that means anything you do to desecrate that temple is a sin. So you don't smoke cigarettes, you don't drink alcohol, you don't get tattoos, you don't pierce your ears. There was a whole bunch of stuff that were no-nos based on that premise. Well, these are all kind of good health habits, right? You don't want to eat a lot of candy bars. That's desecrating the temple. So get all that sugar out of your life, right? And you don't want to eat things that are going to hurt your temple, and you don't want to do things to your body that hurt the temple of the Holy Ghost. Also, there's enhanced coping, right? Because you're going to a community once a week, maybe multiple times of a week, where you have a mystical experience in the church. It's built for mystical experience. The whole architecture is built around it. The way the room echoes is all part of that mystical experience. When I was very young and I went to church, the service was in Latin. I had no idea what they were saying, but it sounded terrific. And they'd come out with the incense on the chain and swing that, and that smelled amazing. You know, it was all a mystical experience all over the place. And I was part of a community that was all experiencing this mystical thing. And if I had real psychological issues, I could even confess my sins to a priest. So all kinds of support. And these are ways that benefit you in a psychological way, in a physical way, and might even increase your life expectancy. Now, in the real world, when they go study places called blue zones, where people live to be 100 years old, they have better health habits. They have a lot of social support, and they help each other cope with everything, usually small communities like you would find in a church setting. So yeah, this stuff works. So if you think religious experiences are good for you, if you buy into that, and you know now several ways how you can pursue them, should we do it? Should we go for the religious experience? And there are various ways you can do that. You can have a religion, right? And practice that religion. You could do it artificially, perhaps. You could do some structured practices that don't have anything to do with religion, or you could take drugs. So let's look at religion first. We already saw that you can have all these different religious experiences. You got all different ways of getting to them. And we've talked about these enough, I think, but they're there. Now, the artificial thing. Remember, we were talking about the fact that the brain controls all your experiences. And if we could do something to control the brain, we could induce those experiences in ourselves. Well, somebody actually thought that out. Do the neurobiological underpinnings of religious experience mean that it can be artificially recreated? That's the question. And if a divine experience proves to be biologically predetermined, does having the right scientific information enable us to create the illusion of a God? So how do you do that? Well, in the 1990s, Dr. Michael Persinger, the director of the neuroscience department at Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, designed what came to be known as the God helmet. And this is a device that simulates religious experiences by stimulating an individual's temporal parietal lobes using magnetic fields. So this is equivalent to praying very, very hard. It lights up the right part of the brain, the parietal lobes, and now you have that out-of-body kind of mystical experience that we've been talking about. So here's his first mock-up, and he did it, and it actually works. And when I saw this, it reminded me of Woody Allen in Sleeper, where he gets a hold of one of these things. What was it? I don't think this was the orgasmatron. That was a booth he went into. No, this was the thing that got you high, and they passed it around. Yeah, this is like smoking a joint. But anyway, so I went online and I said, "Can you buy this thing?" Because I thought, wouldn't that be great? I could bring it here, and we could all put on the helmet and see God, right? Wouldn't that be great? Well, it turns out the thing you can buy it, but it costs like $650, and I can't afford it. Sorry, but I can send you a link. And Dr. Person's experiments about 20 religious people, I'm losing my voice, which amounts to just 1% of the participants, reported feeling the presence of God or seeing him in the room. Can you imagine? If you're a religious person, you put on this helmet and you see God. Wow. 80% of the participants felt a presence of some sort, which they were reluctant to call God. That's because they're not religious people, and they're smart enough to say, I wasn't feeling God until I put this helmet on. It's the helmet. Okay. But they had the mystical experience. So there you go. God helmet. If you're religious, you see God and feel God. And if you're not religious, well, you just feel God. Okay, good enough. That was the only thing I could see that was, mechanical in nature that would get you there. Now, when I was in college, biofeedback machines were a thing. And I actually went to New York at one point where they were selling them for thousands of dollars at the time. And Lori and I went and we got to actually try out a biofeedback machine. And, the way it works is it gives you an audible sign, a noise of how relaxed you are. And as you relax yourself, your galvanic responses go down and the tone goes down. And eventually you're in a meditative state. That's a cheaper way to get there. They don't cost as much. It's not as effective though. And I'll tell you, every time I use one of those things, it put me to sleep. So, but other things you can do. There's prayer, there's meditation, there's fasting. Fasting can do it. And when I say fasting, this is the kind of fasting that takes more than one day. 3 days of fasting can get you there. And what's happening is, your body is starved for certain chemicals and you start to respond with your brain chemistry changing. Exercise, dancing, intoxicating drugs, these can all do it for you. Humans have historically sought out ways to evoke religious experiences, from meditation and prayer to substances that can induce psychedelic experiences, which are perceived as just as spiritual and real as more natural experiences. Well, why are they just as real? Because they all come from your brain, and your brain is the only source of reality you actually have. So religious experiences are real in that they are constructs of the brain. There are various ways to induce a religious experience, and if they are associated with stress, we know they can cause atrophy of the hippocampus, which leads to brain dysfunction. So that's not good. You want to avoid that. If they're associated with socialization and lowered stress, they increase longevity. So that's a good thing. And you can have these religious experiences either through religious ecstasy brought on by some religious practices, or you can have a brain malfunction like temporal lobe epilepsy and have the experience that way. And this is, by the way, what the psychologists studying saints in the Bible always point to. The symptoms experienced by St. Paul on the road to Damascus were the symptoms of temporal lobe epilepsy. But at the time, they said, Paul, what happened? He says, I saw a light and I went blind. And 3 days later, his eyesight comes back. He had temporal lobe epilepsy. But now he's a saint. And here's another way: listening to music, dancing, that kind of thing. Running marathons, meditating, practicing Zen, taking appropriate drugs, having sex, joining a religion. Some of us don't want to join the religion, so we go for the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Or you can find a church substitute. And a lot of people do this. They'll join a service organization like the Lions Club, and they serve the community, and maybe they give succor to the poor and things like that. And that releases serotonin and the like in your brain, makes you feel good. So that's a way to get there. You can adopt politics or sports as a religion, and a lot of people do that too. Trouble with that is it's probably stressful, which means your hippocampus is going to shrink and you're going to lose your ability to form long-term memories and so on. And we see the symptoms of this all over the place. You can treat politics as a sport and just say, well, I'm for the blue team, and I always vote for the blue team, so on. And then somebody like Menendez turns out to be a little shady, and there goes your stress level, and again, you're in trouble. Same thing with sports. You become a spectator and a team guy, and you wear the right jersey when you watch the football game, and you do your mystic ritual dances when they score. So, and as long as you do that, they're going to win, and so on. And it's kind of a religious substitute, right? And it works really well as long as your team's winning. Or you can play baseball, and I think that's a lot better, because even if you lose, you got the team support and the camaraderie and everything that goes with that. Or you can find a substitute where it's a community that doesn't have dogma associated with it. So no stress, no pressure. You get ethics without all the mysticism that's usually overlaid on top of that stuff. And you get answers to questions that are based on science instead of being made up by some guy in a robe, right? And that's the one I bring. But finally, just be excellent to each other and party on, dude. Okay, that's all I had to say.
Questions? We have a talking stick here. I'm going to start you. There's a good wall.
No aliens in foxholes.
Yeah, that's not true.
So, yeah, so, you know, if say someone is a human, they.
Well, when I was in the army, on my dog tags, I wanted them to put Zen Buddhist.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, I envy religious people. I really do, because life is so much easier if you can say, you know, the devil made me do it, or okay, I failed God, but I can go say the rosary and I'll be okay again, or I can go to a priest and he'll absolve me of my sins. I mean, that makes life so much easier than having to be introspective and where am I broken and how do I fix it? You know, tougher. Yeah.
Ron, thank you. You've answered a puzzle I've had because I have a relative who was born again.
Mm,
And what you said about being born again increases stress.
yeah.
And this woman loves Donald Trump. And what I realized is, well, if I have a lot of stress, that if I have a strong fascist leader, that helps relieve my stress.
Right. He's going to take care of it. He's going to fix it.
He's going to fix it.
He alone can fix it.
And my second question is, from what you've learned, can you see a way to increase the amount of ecstasy that people who attend Red Bank Humanist meetings?
We could do a line dance. We could bring gummies with us. I don't know.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciated your example of the brain function and the wall. That is excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Smile on my face. One question, are you putting spirituality and religiosity in the same thing? Because what I was thinking was spiritual experiences, not religious experience.
Well, it depends on your frame of mind, but basically mysticism is religion without the gods, right? But there's got to be something that you're attributing mysticism to. And that's where it either, you know, it leans toward religion or away from religion. Zen Buddhism is a kind of mysticism because it takes you to a place you don't normally inhabit, but there's no gods associated with it. So, you know.
You're equating mysticism with spirituality.
Yeah, I guess. And again, we're getting into fluffy word territory.
For me, the demarcation, holding strongly the supernatural beliefs would be part of religion. But if you hold firmly to there is an afterlife, that's
Dogma.
religious. But it's like, wow, the world is great as a spiritual. So I use that as the intention.
Comment spirituality. Comment was that people are religious levels. It's worship, you,
Yeah.
having confidence. Well, within that, there's a person spiritual, isn't looking for anything and everything. Looking for Buddhism, spirituality, drugs, they're seekers.
Mhm.
Different dwellers versus seekers.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was good.
I like that. Yeah, that's the way they describe men and women, right? Men are hunters and women are gatherers.
After listening to your lecture, I find myself in a tug of war. Do this, but not too much. That, not too little. So, what is yourself?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Well, every morning I have a kefir shake with a half a banana in it. And what that does is it gets my gut bacteria really happy. And they send mood enhancing drugs to my brain. So it helps me feel better.
Amen.
And then I do it for lunch. So I still feel better. And that's all I've had today is 2 glasses of kefir. Actually, only 1 so far. So diet is important, right? And I go back to that, Temple of the Holy Ghost thing. If you treat your body like crap, you're going to feel like crap. So you don't want to go there. Getting exercise is a good thing. I do that. I do circular breathing when I want to. That's a form of meditation. Totally non-religious activity, but again, it removes all the monkey chatter from your brain and lets you just experience the here and now. Wonderful thing. There are a couple of good Zen books you can read. One is called Dropping Ashes on the Buddha. It's one of the few that actually is true to the practice. And the other one is Zen Flesh, Zen Bones by a guy named Paul Reps. 2 good books. Most Zen writing, by the way, is crap. Because it's written by people who think they know what it is and they don't.
About drugs.
How about drugs? You want some? You got some? Yeah.
I'm curious about what you read.
I eat gummies once in a while. I don't do it all the time, right? You don't want to do it if you're going to go on a road trip because that could be dangerous. I don't do it before I go to the gym. That could be bad.
Well, anything wrong with that? Or is it just what sugar?
Well, I don't eat sugar.
That's what I meant, gummies.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the only drug I do right now is caffeine and a gummy once in a while.
Is there anything wrong with drugs then? Well, why not? Why doing it?
Well, some of them are bad for you, and also, there's the problem with a lot of drugs that they do have a tendency to be really addictive, and addiction is a bad way to go, right? And if you have an addictive personality, you definitely don't want to do any drugs because it's just going to get bad
There's
for
a
you.
lot of but there are a lot of cigarette drugs that are very effective in treating people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of activity on the foot to get these drugs deregulated. So clinical trials can be undertaken, understand the evidence, see the safety of them. And these are good things.
Yeah, you just always be alert to what you're doing. I mean, drinking too much water can kill you, right? So, all things in moderation.
I don't know, statements.
Yeah. Mhm. I eat lion's mane every day.
Stack those. Increasing your brain's capacity.
Right. Well, the only one I've had real experience with is lion's mane, and I'm 75 years old, and I put this talk together, so that says something, right?
Very interested in music, I don't know how much of your research centered on that, but I've never been to a church where they have gospel music, but I have seen blues. And but you've been to a rock concert, and if you're familiar with the song that the former band is singing, everybody sings along,
Yeah,
and it seems as a transcendental experience.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now you're part of a community, right? You're a group mind in inhabitants.
Speaking of course prohibited.
You're also loaded, right?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, you do think that there's a certain level of activity that releases feel good hormones that is beneficial.
Yeah,
So the danger is you can be addicted.
right. People become addicted to sex, for example, and you can ruin your life, right?
So ultimately, it's a matter of, is it, what you said, you go back to,
Well,
it's wisdom, like making good choices.
yeah, right. And one of those good choices is don't do this too much, right? One of the things that really upsets me lately is all of these gambling applications on the phone. And the come on that they give you, oh, we'll give you $1,000 in money if you bet $5, right? What they don't tell you is you can only use that $1,000 to make more bets. So it's like they're not giving you anything. They're hooking you into the point where they excite the parts of your brain that respond to the flashing colors and the motion and so on. And every so often they'll give you a little bit of a reward. And that gives you a little jolt of dopamine. And that says, oh, let me figure out what I did right so I can do it again. And you keep on playing. And the dopamine jolts don't have to come very often, but as long as they keep coming, you're going to keep playing. And people lose their lives that way.
There were some things that he said. Well. That's where the big fear and anxiety. So, positive thing.
Yeah, there's another effect too, like, in the amygdala, that's where you release the stress hormones. And that's where we also perceive things like fear and threat and so on. And what they've learned is over time, if you're subjected to a certain experience multiple times, you lose sensitivity to it. We will experience that. So even something that feels really good and you're doing all the right things, the rewards tend to diminish over time. And then you start looking for, well, how can I get that back? And then you find other behaviors which may be good for you or may be bad for you. Did you appreciate it? Oh, sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
great talk, Ron. Good. My question is, studies on how the constant use of cell phones, how that impacts your ability to use positive experiences, because I feel like that has really impacted all of society.
Yeah, oh, I agree. There's very little research out there, and I'll tell you why. Because they don't want you to know what they're doing, right? So they keep it pretty close to the vest. But all of the things that psychologists have learned about human behavior is going into making those applications as addictive as possible. The other thing that happens is you're locked in now to an application called social media or some variant of it. And that social media takes you out of what a real community is and replaces it with a make-believe community where nothing you see is real. A lot of it is threatening. A lot of it suppresses you as a person. A lot of it lowers your feelings of self-esteem. And once in a while, you get a little jolt of dopamine out of it because somebody gives you a thumbs up or emoji or something, right? And it's addictive, and it's designed to be addictive, but it has a lot of negative consequences. The first example of this that I ever saw was Lori and I were walking down the street in Red Bank, and they had outside tables, and there were 6 girls, probably in their 20s, sitting around the table, and they were all looking at their phones. Now here they are in a communal setting over a meal, and they're not talking to each other. They might be texting each other, but how bizarre is that? So where's the sense of community going to come from? Yeah.
I have a fundamental question. Why do I have to be ecstatical and have this spiritual experiences? As a humanist, I don't even believe, I don't believe, fundamentally there is after anything outside me.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
Everything is physical.
Yeah.
Okay, this physical clarity around us, we ourselves are totally physical.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any spirit.
So.
The spirit is made by religion.
Okay.
And God.
No. Experiences come from your brains. You don't have to attribute them to God.
Of course don't have anything as such in the spiritual. But then my cat eats her food and she's so ecstatic,
Mhm.
sitting there. I love eating and I mean, not bad eating, I'm very good even, agriculture.
Mhm.
But when I eat any food that I eat, normally, very ecstatic.
Right, so you have good gut bacteria that are rewarding you for eating the right things.
It is, that's what it is me.
Yeah,
There's nothing is spiritual, which is outside me.
no,
That's
unless you pray to the turmeric god. Yeah,
I love your talk.
thank you. I love you being here.
Talk about what I find fills my cup is nature.
Uh-huh.
Looking at the ocean and being in forest and hiking. And that reminds me of Shinrin-yoku, which is a Japanese forest bathing, where they, put electrodes on people's heads and put them in the forest. And they've gotten better, felt better. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I tend to lean towards what do you call it? Evolutionary psychology, right? Anything that we do or feel, or it all has to do with our evolution, right? All of our behaviors. And if something that you did or humans did or hominids did 100,000 years ago had a positive outcome in terms of the viability of current and future generations, got kept in because there were more current and future generations that did that thing. And if it was bad for you in that it did not promote current and future viability, then it bred itself out. So all of the things that make you feel good had a positive effect on your ability to produce offspring that would survive, right? So if, walking through the woods on a beautiful day without any threats is a thing that would promote the viability of you as a contributor to your species, then that's going to be something that lives on in your genetics. Right. And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. One of the bad things that we've done to ourselves is, one of the things that rewards you is finding comfort and protection from the elements. So we have a propensity to want to build houses and settle down. And that gives rise to things like cities over time. And now what we've done is we've put ourselves in a position where a kid growing up today may never in his whole life see a turtle or an elephant or a giraffe, or if he's got enough money, he'll go to Africa and shoot one, right? But we've lost that interface with nature to a large extent. You can go to the park, but it's just a little grassy field with a tree or two. It's not what we bred ourselves to be immersed in. And I get where you're coming from, because I used to hike for days at a time. It's hard to do that these days now. When you're 75, doing the Appalachian Trail, questionable. Can I carry enough pills with me?
Going in love, they call their form, I met console me,
Yeah, yeah, because there's a love drug.
the thing of it is, does it last?
Well, right. Well, how long have we been married, Lauren? Think hard. Huh?
45 years.
Yeah, no, we've been married for almost 53 years now. So there are ways to do it. You want me to do that talk next?
You said you could become addicted to sex.
Yeah. Well, don't be so selective in who you have it.
So the bio says your futures,
Yeah.
where do you see the experience fitting into the future? Ray Kurzweil, his spirituality
Yeah.
Talks in the end about, when he looks at the ocean, which to me is certainly a spiritual experience. All he sees is calculations. That blew my mind. And I respect that and how most people say that. Where do you see religious experience? Where it's beyond the God, that's pretty cool. I think.
Yeah, well, if you got enough money, would you buy one for us and donate it to the Red Bank families? Maybe we should take well, pass the plate around. Well, religion in general is in decline. It's still in the US, it's still more than half the population. It's up around 75% of the population considers themselves part of a religious group. But that means 25% don't. So that number is growing, the people that don't. Unfortunately, though, if you look at our politics, you can't become a politician and say you're an atheist. Nobody will vote for you. Isn't that strange? But anyway, I think over time, religious practice with established churches that exist as they do today, I think that's going to go out of fashion because kids today don't buy into all the mystical trappings that go with it because they've been to sci-fi movies, they've seen the superheroes on the screen, and to go read about Moses parting the Red Sea. Well, that's a neat trick, but they just did it with CGI. So, it doesn't have as much of a wallop for them. But going to a rock concert and going into the mosh pit and getting thrown around and raving and all that stuff, that does have a positive effect. So that kind of activity is going to increase and go on. And people finding ways to stimulate their brains one way or another, that's going to go on, and it's going to go more prevalent because we're getting better at that too. Right? I mean, 50 years ago, there was no such thing as a gummy. And now you can go into a store and actually say, well, is this indica or is this sativa? And get very particular about what kind of high you're going to get. And it doesn't cost that much money, and it's not against the law, and it's not going to hurt you, and why the hell not? So you do it. And that's going to increase.
There's a great chart I've seen, I don't remember where it came from, but it plots societal success based on about 22 quantitative measures of success, like the amount of crime, the number of rapes, and so on, the amount of education in society. Societal success versus belief in the supernatural. And the US is in that chart, rates very low with respect to societal success compared to many other countries, especially the Norwegian, the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
I'll post it on the Red Bank.
Well, as a side note, if you look at the statistics of people in jail, the lowest number is atheists. They make up less than 3% of the population of any prison is atheists.
Thank you very much. I just want to mention that it is noon. Thank everybody for coming. I think this is a fascinating Q&A, so I'd like to continue. Don't feel shy about leaving, but I just,